Geek. Talking baseball every week. Cause the Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman the Geek, season wrap-up edition. I'm John Bonus of Twiz Daily with me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
Yes, we got a kind of a hodgepodge of stuff.
We got some loose ends to tie up.
Yeah.
And there's also just the kind of news that comes out is sort of end of season news, start of the off season news.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And we'll recap our spring training, our annual preseason over-under picks.
Yes.
To see just how horribly we were.
Yeah.
We did at predicting baseball, which we seem to be getting worse.
It does seem to be getting worse.
Which is weird.
I think the rules that I think this is what happens a lot of the time. You fall in love with certain rules.
Yeah, and then maybe they aren't true anymore.
They don't work as well.
Yeah, we used to be, I had a couple years where I went like 13-2, 12-3, 11-4, and now I'm like, I've lost my mortgage, I've lost my car, I've lost my shirt, my pants, everything on these bets. So we'll go over those. It's kind of our way we use it in spring training as a way to kind of preview the American League,
right.
Twins included, but the American League as a whole, we'll use it now to kind of look back.
To recap and
what were the big
keep
surprises.
ourselves humble.
Yeah, that's what it really serves to do now.
It also reminds you people that as much as we act like we know what the hell is happening and what we're talking about, looking into the future is a very difficult thing in baseball.
I had this argument with Paul Allen on K-Fan Tuesday,
right.
And he wasn't thrilled with the stance I took, which was the stance you just said, which is nobody knows anything. And never trust someone who thinks they can predict playoff baseball, and I would even take that and say just baseball in general. That's a Susan Waldman. You can't predict baseball.
My only rule on if I bet baseball, which I don't very often, would be in the postseason, just always bet the underdog. That's probably what I would do.
You're saying that after 3 weeks of underdog.
Well, no, but I would say that every year because I think the one thing that that is true in baseball is people think they know what's going to happen, and they overestimate how good the latest team is. Right?
Who fancies himself a professional gambler for some reason. But yeah,
he was a professional gambler for a while, right? Like he lived in Vegas for a while, trying to just no, he did not. He wasn't trying to.
He's worked at a racetrack for 30 years.
Sure, of course, right. He's a handicapper,
and he likes to gamble.
Right.
No, you know how I know he's not a professional gambler? He hosts a radio show.
No, I know, but I wonder if he used to be.
Maybe. So me too. I used to be a professional. I did used to gamble. I haven't bet on anything in a very long time, other than when I was in Vegas. But so maybe I've just lost the touch.
Maybe that's it.
But I also lost money plenty back then. So. Okay, so what we wanted. Oh, and we should also say
there's a reason you quit.
Well, it wasn't the monetary.
No, okay, all right.
No, it was like can't keep meeting people in McDonald's parking lots and handing them envelopes and receiving envelopes wasn't a great look from them. One of the
McDonald's parking lots. Was it actually a McDonald's parking lot?
Minnetonka Hopkins. Shut. You guys can go to that parking lot and see if there's any blood splatter or anything.
Yeah. Now you know where all the big money's being exchanged, people.
That's right. It's true. I did it at a bank one time too. I remember like one of the first dates I went on with Becky. This was 10 years ago, roughly 9-10 years ago.
Was it a McDonald's parking lot where you got money?
I have taken her to McDonald's a couple times. She likes the fish fillet, so that was always. We were watching a Oklahoma City Thunder versus San Antonio Spurs playoff game, and this is like when Oklahoma City had Durant and Westbrook and all those guys, and the Spurs had Duncan and Parker and Ginobili and all that, and because she was trying to charm me, which is hilarious in retrospect, she was like, "Oh, I'm super into watching NBA games at bars. It's great." Wow. Okay. And I remember being like, I got $100 on this game.
We call that the mushroom pizza in the bonus house.
Yes. I remember you told that story. Yeah. Whatever you're into, we have a version of that with red velvet cake at Stella's. I used to go to Stella's a lot. So then she went to Stella's a lot once we started dating, and Stella's dessert menu had a red velvet cake. And the first time we sat at the bar and they were like, "You want dessert?" And she looked at it and she was like, "Ooh, red velvet cake would be good." So then for the next 50 times we went there, I always ordered red velvet cake because in my head I thought, well, she's super into red velvet cake. And then one day, like 4 years later, she said, how come you don't eat red velvet cake anymore? Like, we go to restaurants, sometimes they'll have a red velvet cake and you never order it. And I said, oh, I don't even like red velvet. I don't like desserts. I just ordered it every time because I thought you loved red velvet cake. And then she went, well, I don't like red velvet cake. I had it the one time, and then you just kept ordering it. And I thought, man, this guy loves red velvet cake. So, yeah, that's the same thing. But, yeah, I remember telling her, I got $100 on this game, and her being like, oh, wow. Now I'd be like, I got $100 on this game. She'd be like, why are you telling me that? First of all, you're an idiot. Second of all, anyway. So we'll get to that.
Gambling tangent.
Later in the show.
Yeah, right.
How stupid we are. This is a precursor to how stupid we are. Just this conversation, you might think to yourself, man, these guys are dumb. But we're going to really prove it later. In the meantime, one thing, so the Twins have every baseball team has like an annual set of awards, Rookie of the Year, MVP, all that. The Twins are called the Diamond Awards, and they have a actual like ceremony banquet.
Yes.
Built around it, which John is on the planning committee. Is that what it's officially called? You have been.
I don't know exactly what it's
quite
called.
A while now.
Yeah. It's a fantastic event. It's a big fundraiser for the University of Minnesota for a bunch of crummy neurological diseases like ALS and ataxia and all kinds of other stuff like that. And yes, it is always the Thursday night big banquet just before Twins Fest begins. That makes it January 25th this year. They also are having a new location this year. It's going to be at the Armory. And the idea behind kind of putting it in the Armory is it's going to be a little less banquety and a little more interactive and fun. A
little more of a show.
Yeah, a little more of a show as opposed to a dinner kind of thing. And so I recommend that you go take a look and try to just do a quick search on Diamond Award Twins. You'll be able to go there and buy tickets.
You being on the
Twins Daily will probably be getting some tables. So you can also, if you put in the comment section like something like Twins Daily, eventually you'll probably end up at one of our tables.
You being on the planning committee, did you said let's make it at the closest possible venue to my home so I can just walk over there?
We are excited about that because it's almost always the coldest weekend of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, so that'll be, what did you say, the Thursday of Twins Fest. Then obviously the Twins Fest
January 25th.
Is that weekend, and then I'm assuming the Winter Meltdown will be that Saturday.
I am assuming as well.
Now, I'm out for this year. I'm done from Winter
I have done nothing on the Winter Meltdown this year.
Wow. We got it under control, John.
We got lots of time, yeah.
Here's the thing. You're going to go to a bar. We'll have a guest. We'll go up on stage. We'll interview him. That's the whole thing. So, but we wanted to, first of all, we'll go over the actual winners, which they announced yesterday. Which are voted on by the local BBWA members.
Yes.
So I voted. But then there's also like a committee of, I don't even know, ex-players maybe even, people in the Twins Hall of Fame. I'm not even sure who votes on it. But I know it's more people than just the BBWA.
Oh, I did not know that.
Because there's like 40 votes or 30 votes, and there's only like 13 people in the local BBWA.
I did not know that. Okay.
Anyway, we'll go over the results of those because some of them are kind of interesting. I can tell you how I voted if anybody cares about that. But then, obviously, team MVP is the big one. And so I thought we would kind of we do this pretty much every year, but kind of go over our, I don't know, top 5, top 10, whatever it is, our ballot.
Yep.
Beyond just the winner, who was Sonny Gray. So, Sonny Gray, team MVP. That's also who I voted for.
Right.
Team MVP. I know some people, Lavelle, are very much against the notion in any context, in any sort of MVP, of a pitcher winning. And, yeah, okay, fine. I know Lavelle didn't vote for Pedro Martinez 30 years ago, and people are still know him for that or are mad at him for that. I actually asked him about a month ago if he had it to do over, would he change that? Would he do it differently? Has he changed his mind about how pitchers stack up against hitters in MVP, and he said absolutely not. I'm even stronger in my thought on that, which is a very Lavelle thing to say. But I don't really take that same stance. I never have. I've never quite understood that, unless you're explicitly told MVP is for hitters.
Right. To
me, it's just most valuable player, and I always thought the idea, the thing you'll hear is, well, a starting pitcher only pitches, 32, 33 times a year, whereas a position player might play 150 games, although not on the Twins. He might play 110 games on the Twins. But I always thought that was flawed. I mean, that's true, so you can affect more games. But the control over each of those 32 games, let's say, that a starting pitcher had is massive. I mean, they control half the game for that game. Whereas a hitter, yes, they play 110 games, but they're just 1 of 9 batting, and you don't know how many balls they're going to get in the field. And also, if you just look at the end of the year at the number of plate appearances for a hitter versus the number of plate appearances, or you might call them batters faced for a pitcher, Well, a starting pitcher will blow away an everyday position player. A starting pitcher could face 800, 900, even 1,000 batters if they, pitch a lot of innings. Whereas a position player might get 550, 600 plate appearances, something like that. Now, you toss in some defense, for instance, an outfielder's going to field a couple of balls a game. Maybe you want to tack that into the impact, although a pitcher can also field their position and control the running game and pick people off and all that stuff. So I always thought,
in terms of value, I guess I agree with you. I don't necessarily see a difference there. I've always felt like the reason they don't give a pitcher MVP is because the pitchers already have an award.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And I'm although I don't rule out pitchers for the MVP vote, I also downgrade them a little bit because they've already got their own award over there. Right? I guess Sonny Gray won 2 awards yesterday. He won the MVP and he won the best pitcher on the staff, which is in Major League Baseball, you've got the Cy Young and you've got the MVP, right? So
if they wanted to add like a hitter of the year, like
which they did, they've got like the Henry Aaron Award or something like that. But
it just new awards are difficult to get people to care about, basically, in baseball, or in any sport. But I think it would be it would feel silly even if they had like the Babe Ruth Award or the Barry Bonds. Well, they're not going to do that one. The Ted Williams Award, let's say, most valuable hitter, basically, to match the Cy Young, except 90-something% of MVP winners have been hitters anyway. So then you're just going to have duplicates on that end. So yeah, I sort of see that. Yeah. I will say that if it's like a coin flip, like if there had been a hitter that I deemed precisely as valuable as Sonny Gray, I probably would lean towards the hitter.
Yeah, I'd actually take it a little bit stronger than that. What I'd say is if there's a pitcher that is clearly the one.
Yes, like this year.
Like this year. Then it's the pitcher, right? But otherwise, otherwise I'd probably be a hitter.
That seems fine with me. Well, so I had a vote for American League MVP this year, and we're not supposed to say, but Shohei Ohtani's going to win the award. Let's just say that, and I don't disagree with that. Okay. I was going to say he might be unanimous, but I suppose that gives away my vote. But we're not. We were instructed not to. I've had It's funny. We got an email from the BBWAA. I'm sure I'm not supposed to be talking about this either, but whatever. Saying, hey, be careful because now that people can kind of actively gamble on the outcome of these awards that you guys vote on. Yeah. And to be clear, something like AL MVP is voted on by 30 people. So I was one of 30. Right. I mean, that's not, you don't have to do a lot of kind of research to figure out where the wind's blowing on some of this stuff. Right. And so they advised us that be careful for people reaching out to try to get a sense of who you're voting for, or even your down ballot choices, because you can vote on like runner up and all that stuff. And sure enough, I had several people reach out to me. I don't know how they found out, because I guess I said it on the podcast maybe once, but anyway, the tricky part there to me on the league wide level is, I think on a team wide level, it's going to be a pitcher more often. Right. Just because you're dealing with a much smaller sample of players, and like this year, they had a lot of good hitters, but most of their good hitters were part time, like Royce Lewis, Ed Julian.
I basically got like a 5-way tie for second,
right? And so when there's no standout, all-star 140 game hitter, then you turn to the pitcher. But on the league wide level, there's always going to be at least a few standout hitters. Obviously, now Shohei is unique; he's a unicorn because he's a hitter and a pitcher, but I have always found it tricky where, like Garrett Cole, for instance, is going to win the Cy Young in the American League. Yeah. He had a great year. Yes, right. Did he have like a spectacular year relative to Cy Young winners? No, I just think he had kind of a normal Cy Young winning year.
And he's a Yankee. So.
Where do you? Well, yeah, I don't dock him for that. Where do you rank him on a top 10 MVP ballot? It's a little different because it's like, well, there are definitely hitters who deserve it, including Shohei, who's also a pitcher, but. So, I struggle with that. But with the Twins, it's like you look up and down the lineup, the only guy who had 500 plate appearances was Correa, and he was one of their worst hitters.
He had him a -2.5 WPA.
Right, and also just a 94 OPS plus. And I mean, he certainly would tell you he doesn't deserve to be on the MVP. Right. So their next guy was Kepler, but he had like 475 plate appearances. He's certainly on my top 10 or top 5.
Me too.
But it didn't feel, and by the way, he was pretty bad in the first half and then amazing in the second half. So even that is like a half a season of, MVP caliber impact. Royce Lewis played 58 games. You can go on and on. A guy like Willie Castro was great, but he was kind of a utility part-time guy. And so I found it very easy to pick Gray, and then in the same thinking, Pablo Lopez to me was an easy number 2 choice.
Yeah.
Now,
I had him tied at number 2 with a bunch of guys.
Okay.
I did. So.
That's fair enough. And I'll say that the BBWA just asked you for the local award,
Right.
just vote for the winner.
Right.
Whereas AL MVP, I had to fill out 10. Had to, like, it was a big burden, but I had to fill out 10 because down ballot.
Right.
I'm assuming that comes out right after the World Series. I don't know. Does it come out before the World Series? Anyway, they list who we vote for now. So I always. Like, I think I did Cy Young last year or something, and there's always angry fans.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember when they announced that. They did that, like, in the 2-3 days before the World Series? Because they got, like, a 2-day break between the ALCS and such. The World Series. I think they usually do it after.
Yeah, because it's one a day for, like, a week.
Yes, that's right.
So,
I
right.
think they do it after.
So, okay. So, just to go over, Rookie of the Year for the Twins was Royce Lewis,
right.
which I also voted for. That's a relatively tough one. I will say that Ed Julian probably would have won the Diamond Award for Twins Rookie of the Year in 80% of past seasons, basically.
Right.
He had a fantastic rookie year.
Yes.
He played 100 and something games. He's
on my top 10 ballot.
Well, for MVP,
Right.
And for that matter, Matt Wallner would have won Twins Rookie of the Year. Not insignificant.
More than 50% of the time, probably.
Probably.
Yeah,
at least like a quarter of past seasons, basically. But I thought Lewis. I do think you can make somewhat of an argument for Julian over Lewis just in terms of quantity.
I think you can.
But Lewis just made such an incredible impact beyond just like OPS and all that. Just he had 50-something RBIs in 58 games, all the grand slams, all the clutch hits, all that stuff. So, pitcher, like we said, was Gray over Lopez, basically. Most improved, I think this one had the most disagreement among the BBWA voters.
It was awarded to Jeffers,
yes,
right?
I voted for Jeffers because to me, at this point last year, Jeffers had such a bad season and had been injured that they demoted him to second string and then went out and spent $30 million on a new starting catcher in Vasquez. By midseason, Jeffers had already climbed back to the top of the depth chart. He started all 6 playoff games. And here's the thing that makes it easy for me. He led all major league catchers in OPS this season.
Yeah, right.
And he also improved defensively. So to go from a guy who played his way out of a starting job to then leading all major league catchers leading your entire position among all 30 teams in OPS, it's harder to imagine a bigger turnaround. Now, with that said, Kepler could have gotten most improved.
Yep.
Pagan certainly could have gotten most improved.
Yep.
I think someone like Willie Castro, you could maybe even make an argument for most improved.
Although he wasn't really part of the team, but yes.
Yeah, most improved in general.
I was going to suggest Ober, maybe.
Yeah, although Ober was good, he just didn't pitch this many innings.
Right, that's right.
But yeah, all those guys would. It's kind of like the Rookie of the Year thing.
Yeah, right.
Several of these guys could have won most improved in past years for sure. I voted for Jeffers, so. And then defensive player of the year for the Twins. This is the only award.
It's gotta be Correa.
It was Correa, but this is the only one I didn't vote for Correa. He was fine defensively.
Right.
I voted for Michael Taylor.
Yeah.
And I also probably would have voted for Kepler over Correa also.
How about Jeffers?
Yeah. Jeffers was okay defensively. It wasn't amazing. But yeah, Correa is a deserving winner. A shortstop who plays good defense can always win it. But I thought Michael Taylor relative to center fielders and Correa relative to shortstops, I thought Taylor stood out more. And Kepler's always good and right. But Correa ended up winning it. And then the last two, not that anybody should necessarily care about this one, but the Media Good Guy Award went to Pablo Lopez, who we've talked about before. He's one of the nicer people and smarter people I've ever met, regardless of baseball. And then he also won the Community Service Award, which we don't vote on. The Twins just figure from their end who did the most community service. And I guess it's not surprising to me that Pablo Lopez also won that.
Right.
Because, he did so much stuff. We'd see him with kids pregame, visiting hospitals, doing all sorts of stuff.
Right.
Well, basically, if there was an opportunity to do something, Lopez and often his family would be doing it. So, MVP ballot, let's just go through, compare and contrast here. We both had Sonny Gray number 1.
Yeah.
I had Pablo Lopez as a fairly clear-cut number 2, but
Yeah, I had a 5-way tie for number 2, but because I wanted to break the tie, I have to do them. I actually ended up with Pablo Lopez behind the 4 hitters for the reason we talked about.
Okay.
That basically I was going to give the hitters the inside track on that. And so my number 2 was Castro. with I don't know, where did Castro end up on yours? 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I had Jeffers as 3, Kepler as 4, and Royce Lewis as 5.
Okay. I mean, I think that's reasonable. I had Gray number 1, Pablo Lopez number 2. I do think I get what you're saying.
Did we have 2 through 6 the same way, just in different orders? Yes. That's what I kind of figured. Yeah.
I do think though, if Sonny Gray were removed, if we could wipe our brains of Sonny Gray,
right,
you would have voted Lopez team MVP.
I don't think so. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I would, because like I said, if in a tie like that,
I would have voted Willie Castro for team MVP. You think Willie Castro?
I might have gone Jeffers on that. I was really torn between Kepler and between Castro and Jeffers.
So I went Gray, Lopez. I went Gray, half step down. Lopez, half step down. Royce Lewis 3rd. Kepler 4th. Jeffers 5th. Castro 6th. And then I think Duran, there was so much focus on the fact that he wasn't as sharp as he was last season. The guy finished with a 2.40 ERA.
Right.
By the way, top 10 in the American League in WPA for relievers, top 10 in strikeout rate, top 10 in expected ERA. I looked at his actual hits allowed. Last year, 207 opponent's batting average. This year, 207 opponent's batting average. Right. He allowed a 320 slugging percentage. His strikeout rate was nearly identical to last year. The only thing that really changed was the walks, and that does go with the general sense that he wasn't as sharp. But really, that was just like a month-long stretch in the second half. He finished on a high note. He was great in the playoffs, although that doesn't factor into this. We vote before the playoffs. But I think he set such an impossibly high standard as a rookie.
I agree with you, actually.
And so anytime he struggles, people are like, what's wrong with him? What's wrong with him? And you look, and yes, he walked too many guys this year. Yeah. His walk rate, I think, went from 2.1 per 9 to 3.6. That's too many. But he was almost identically unhittable as last year.
His WPA went down from last year, too.
Yes, but also he was used in a much different way. Well, there were a lot of spots where he was put into bases loaded, 2 men on, pitched multiple innings, that sort of thing, in a fireman role, which is going to lend itself to, if you pitch well in that, you can rack up WPA. I'm not saying he was as good. I just think it was, he still finished top 10 in WPA. Yeah. He led Twins relievers by far. He was second to Gray, I think, on the whole team.
Yes, he was.
I just think there's a difference between, it's worth differentiating for a player as good as him between, boy, he wasn't as sharp as last season with, well, he was still, if he would have done this last season, we'd still be extremely hyped up about John Duran.
Right.
As an overall entity.
For sure. Yes.
So I think that was worth saying.
So and did you have him at number 7 then?
I would argue he could maybe even be 6, but 6 or 7 with Castro.
I had him basically tied with Polanco. 7 and 8. I basically had those two tied, and I ended up going with Polanco over Duran. But, I didn't necessarily.
Yeah, you are very much veering towards Lavelle territory with the pitching side.
Well,
another 5 years you'll be there.
I don't feel that way quite as much with relievers as I do with starters.
Go smoke 4,000 cigars, chug a thing of bourbon, that's right, and you'll be there.
Become the mayor of Fort Myers, and then
that's right. So I had Gray, Lopez, Lewis, Kepler, Jeffers, Duran, Castro. I would say Julian, and then Ober.
Yep.
And then instead of Polanco, I had Michael Taylor.
Okay.
But that's splitting hairs.
Yep.
Basically.
I had Taylor, also made my top 10.
I gave Taylor a little extra credit. First of all,
Ober was 11.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Again, you hate pitchers. That's what we've decided here. We've realized that.
Right. Yeah.
I also just, in a season where pitching clearly carried them, I feel like discounting the pitchers feels a little weird to me.
That's fair.
But on Taylor versus Polanco was really good, especially once he came back in the second half. But he only played 80 games total.
Yeah.
And Taylor played, 125 games. And I also give Taylor a little extra credit for the save their ass factor.
Yep.
Which is he was not brought in to start 110, 120 games in center field. He was brought in to be the fourth outfielder, to step in when Buxton inevitably missed time. Instead, he just became the everyday center fielder. And I'm not saying he was a great hitter, but he was an okay hitter. He had some good moments. He popped 20 homers. He was good on the bases. and he was excellent defensively. And also he just played, 1,000 innings in center field where their alternatives, especially early in the season, were going to be real iffy. It was going to be like Joey Gallo in center field. Now, Castro kind of emerged as an option, although I don't think they wanted to play him every day in center field. So I give Taylor a little extra credit just for like what would they have done without him truly.
I mean, I did the same thing in 2019 with Kepler moving to helping out in center field when Buxton went down. Like that was a light thing. I ended up making Taylor, did make my list. He was number 10. He was just behind Julian. And basically, I mean, again, those two and Ober were basically tied. I actually when I kind of did my
hate pitchers.
When I did my numbers thing, I actually had Taylor up higher than Julian. I just kind of went, I'm not putting Julian. Just helped solidify the top of that order so much that once he kind of came in and decided we were going to put him at leadoff spot. His WPA was not particularly good, which has kind of shocked me given how many.
No, but it was solidly positive.
It was I think it was 0.1.
No.
Really?
It was like point. Well, maybe look at different ones.
Maybe if I was looking at fan graphs.
But first of all, he only played 100 games. But
yes, right.
I think.
I never ranked Julian higher than Taylor anyway because I just felt in my heart.
I get what you're saying.
The more valuable player.
What I would say on WPA is, we both like it a lot. Some people hate that we like it. It's not predictive, which we've gone over. It does, I think, serve as a good recap, which is precisely what we're trying to do here. Right. If, like, you can say, oh, this guy, like Willie Castro is a perfect example. You can go, oh, Willie Castro had a 725 OPS. He was like basically an average hitter. Right. But the impact he made with those average hitting skills was like much higher WPA, because he hit like 360 with runners in scoring position or late and close or whatever. And I think he was tied for the team lead among hitters in WPA.
That doesn't mean that he's going to be that next year. It just means he did that this year.
Right. What I'll say about like someone like Julian, and I know who else was sort of in that boat. I mean, Taylor,
Jeffers was like that a little bit.
Right.
I still gave Jeffers a number 3 overall.
So I think there's a tendency, maybe because we overplayed WPA possibly, but to look and go, oh, well, this guy had really good numbers, but he was only like sort of closer to neutral-ish in WPA. But I think people sometimes confuse WPA with WAR, whereas WAR is set on a scale of replacement level, which a replacement level player is like a freely available AAA waiver wire. A team full of replacement level players will win like 50 games. They'll be the worst team in the league. That's the goal of it. Whereas WPA is set at a baseline of average, and an average team will
win 81 games.
And basically almost be a playoff team.
Yeah, well, I mean, mathematically, that's the way where it works out with WPA. Exactly. Right.
And so all I mean here is you look at Julian or Jeffers, or I know Taylor was barely above average, and you go, I mean, even someone like Kepler didn't have an amazing WPA given how good they were in the second half. And you go, wow, they're like 0.1 or 0.2. We got to remember, 0 is an average, 80 win caliber player.
Yes.
And so even being 0.2 means you're like an 85 win player.
Right.
And so maybe that's a little underwhelming giving like Julian's overall numbers, but that's the only point I would make there. It's like, I think there's
a fair point.
When you look at WPA and you go, man, this guy's 0. 0 is pretty good. Like 0, the equivalent for WAR, which is wins above replacement, an exactly average player will have like 2.5 or 3 WAR sometimes, depending on the playing time, obviously. But okay, so I don't know. There's not a ton of disagreement there, other than John hates pitchers.
Just kind of a different shuffling of the different.
Yeah,
of the same tier.
I think in general that speaks to. I mean, look, obviously Sonny Gray was great. Him being on the top of everyone's ballot. I don't know if it was unanimous or what, but I think he was I know it wasn't unanimous. But the part about like 2 through 6 or 7 being sort of interchangeable, I disagree with that. I would put Lopez, but in general, I think speaks to what we saw and talked about all season with the lineup, which is they didn't do it with a standout performance. No one played, more than 110 games and had a great season.
No.
Like Kepler's the closest to that probably, but even he was platooned. He had a bad first half. He was but banged up a little. He had a really good season, but there was no like, oh, this guy was an all-star hitter. What they got was a lot of guys for 50 or 70 or 80 or 100 games. A lot of guys in part-time roles, a lot of guys who got called up mid-season and made a huge impact. And so it was what they did offensively, they did via depth and mixing, matching, and the arrival of Julian, Lewis, and Wallner. But because those were mid-season arrivals, and in a couple cases it didn't take right away because the Twins were hesitant to hand them jobs, you end up with Wallner had an amazing per-game numbers, but he only played 70 games, and Royce Lewis only played 58 games. So I think that's kind of, borne out in this.
To me, the story of that list is that Correa was nowhere near it.
Yes.
Which,
I don't know where I would put him, but
yeah, I mean,
like how many I would have to go to put him?
The truth is I think he was right about 11 through 14, something like that. Like just having a shortstop who he wasn't an league average offensive hitter, but he was kind of a league average offensive hitter that just did not hit in the clutch at all.
Right.
Which, again, if I'm going to give credit for hitting in the clutch and a high WPA, I have to take credit away for doing it.
By the way, going back to kind of the idea of zero being valuable in WPA, he was negative 2.4, which I think it was by far the worst on the team. I think it was like one of the three worst in the American League.
Yes.
And so, like, if he just played good defense, which he did at a key spot, and was just a 95 OP, a slightly below average hitter, well, that just makes him Michael Taylor, basically, who I put 10th.
Right.
Except the difference was Taylor's slightly below average hitting relative to the league, and really for the position, sort of average-ish hitting, which is true of Correa too. Well, he actually did pretty well in some clutch spots. Correa not only didn't do well in clutch spots, he was abysmal in clutch spots. And so that knocks him down. I do think, just the fact that he was in there every day and he did play a good shortstop, but I just think he ended up, because they were so hesitant until late, moving him down in the lineup. He came up in so many big spots, and he just so rarely came through. And within that, grounded into so many rally-killing double plays.
You're right.
That I think he would probably even tell you, if he were sitting here, he'd say, "Why am I hanging out with you two idiots?" But would probably tell you, I don't deserve to be anywhere near the top 10. It's tricky at that point because it's like, well, then he was a negative offensively. He was a positive defensively, and he played a ton. And I don't know how they necessarily would have replaced him.
So was Michael Taylor, but he wasn't quite as negative offensively.
No, that's kind of how I view it.
He's a good comp, right? If you're looking for similar,
if Correa had just been slightly below average overall offensively and in clutch spots, and he had grounded into 14 double plays instead of 30 double plays, I do think there would be an argument, 9th, 10th, 11th, something like that.
I agree.
Okay. So before we move on to other non-award related things, let's talk about our first batch of sponsors here. Hatch, so they sent me one of these, and here's how I would describe it. It's sort of like an all-in-one sleep machine, I would call it. They can use that if they want. It can help you kind of set the environment of your bedroom. It can help you go to sleep. It can provide like white noise or however you'd like to, rain sounds.
White, pink, brown noise, other sleep sounds inspired by nature, sure.
Which I found helpful. And then it can help you sleep. It can also then serve as an alarm, but not in a way that is the worst sound in the world.
Yep.
Where it can wake you up sort of gradually, either through sights and sounds and light.
Sounds or light, yeah.
Yes. Right. And so if you want to wake up to the sounds of birds out in a forest, gradually getting louder, they can do that for you. Or you can just have an alarm.
Sounds awesome, actually.
So it's I don't know. It's as someone who has struggled with sleep, getting to sleep, staying asleep, all that.
It can also kind of teach you yourself, develop the habit of sleeping. Like once you do that, you kind of get used to learning how to fall asleep and how to wake up and so on. So right now, Hatch is offering our listeners $20 off your purchase of a Hatch Restore 2 and free shipping at hatch.co/Gleeman. You can sleep deeply and wake gently with the Restore 2. Go to hatch.co/Gleeman and you're going to get $20 off and free shipping. That's hatch.co/Gleeman.
Hatch, HATCH.co, hatch.co/Gleeman.
And Harry's Razors. I mean,
long time sponsor.
There's no question that I shave. I was oblivious to how much my face was scratching Chrissy's face when our faces would touch.
It's true love.
For 10, 12 years. I did not understand that which seems like a baby face, which can't really grow a beard, does in fact have very scratchy stubble. And I figured that out when I started using Harry's razors, because with Harry's razors, I didn't have to worry about having this razor. Like, the razor was not sitting there for 2 months because I didn't want to go buy more razors.
The idea, part of the appeal of Harry's is you can just get the stuff delivered right to you. But within that, the other appeal is, I think a lot of people will let their razors go far past the point when they should be replaced, because replacing them is a pain.
In the butt, right?
You got to go somewhere. You got to talk to somebody and have them get it out of a case. They unlock it.
I would never have dreamed with my old razors of shaving against the grain, because that's the way I would cut up my face.
Right.
But I've always got a very sharp razor with Harry's.
Right.
And so I shave once with the grain and once away from the grain, and my face is so much smoother right now.
So they've basically...
I like Chrissy liking my face.
Can you imagine liking that face? It's a face only a wife could love. Harry's has kind of eliminated the middleman, so they sell you high quality razors at a very good price point. And if you need new ones, you don't say to yourself, I could probably use this for another month and scratch my face up. You just go, I'll just order new ones. They ship it right to your door.
Yeah, five blades, half the price, great packaging, delivered to your... So it's revolutionized the industry. It's basically taken over the industry.
So they have a trial set,
right,
which is a $13 value, and they're offering it for just $3. So it's a perfect way to give Harry's a try.
Right.
All you have to do is go to Harry's, Harrys, Harrys.com/Gleeman, and you'll get a 5-blade German-engineered razor, has a weighted handle. They'll give you foaming shave gel and also a nice travel cover, so you'll feel like you're really a professional business person.
Yeah.
Shaving, all you have to do is get started with a $13 trial set for only $3 at Harrys.com/Gleeman. That's Harrys.com/Gleeman for the $3 trial set. Okay. We're going to run through this stuff quickly because we really covered more in depth on the Patreon side. Patreon, patreon.com. We'd love to have you join us.
One of the better things the Twins do.
Yes.
And I think maybe one of the more unique things they do. I'm not sure many other Major League Baseball teams provide this kind of opportunity to their
I asked around about this. I'd say it's more do than don't.
Oh, really?
Although even that, it's most of them are more of a structured. So what we're talking about is last Friday, after the season, 2 days after the season ended or something like that, the Twins held a pretty informal, it was going to be in the clubhouse, but then we moved it to the interview room.
Right.
Basically, all the people who cover the team on a day-to-day basis.
They all sat in a circle,
and
like
also John,
singing Kumbaya.
because we need John there. Every party needs John.
That's right.
We sat in like a little prayer circle with Derek Falvey, the president of baseball ops, and Rocco Baldelli, the manager, and they just said, all right, ask us whatever.
Right.
And there was not a single question asked that they said, I'm not going to answer that. Now, we can't guarantee that the answers they gave were that forthcoming, but the vibe of it was, shoot, go ahead.
Yep.
And they did it last year, and they do it pretty much every year. So I give them credit for that. We talked actually a lot more about that, like the value of teams doing that versus, like, I don't know, the Angels or somebody who just won't do that. But so there were like a handful of things from that, and I've written about it, and we did a whole Patreon about it. So if you want like full-on discussion of some of these topics.
I wrote about it on Twins Daily. Yeah, we both learned about 10, 12, 15 things that...
But there were like 4 or 5
season.
things from that I definitely want to at least run through here. The first of which was news that Buxton and Kirilloff they may have now already had it, but we're headed for surgeries.
Right.
Buxton, knee surgery, was having the plica removed on his knee, which is like a fold that some people have that they feel has been leading to the patella tendonitis or the patella soreness, that they're hopeful that can be removed. Now, obviously, he had knee surgery around this time last year, and that didn't go particularly well. And then Kirilloff, who injured his shoulder in like mid-June, was out for a while, rehabbed, came back, hit okay, and then was very bad in the playoffs and made the error at first base in Game 3. He is undergoing or has undergone right shoulder surgery for a torn labrum. Now, they didn't know when we talked to him on Friday the extent of the damage. Like, a quote-unquote torn labrum, there's a big spectrum there.
They've got imaging and such on it, but they're going to know better once they get in and do the surgery.
They thought it was more like fraying and a slight or a partial tear versus a fully torn labrum. I mean, it's a much worse injury for a pitcher, obviously, than
Yes.
The non-throwing arm of a first baseman left fielder. But that's a significant. I mean, for a pitcher, that's the worst injury you can get is a torn labrum. It's significantly worse than the Tommy John elbow injury, torn UCL.
Yes.
In terms of like recovery time and
ability to ever pitch at a high level again.
Right. Percentage
yes.
of people who'd have that surgery and come back to get to where they were is much, much lower for a labrum. It's different for Kirilloff. So the hope with him is it's relatively minor as opposed to a full-on torn labrum, but we'll see. And then Jose Miranda also has a season-long shoulder problem. He was going for surgery. Then the surgeon advised him, it sounded like, well, let's rehab it and see where it's at in a little bit. He may still end up having surgery. It was a little less certain than Buxton and Kirilloff. You know, obviously the Buxton one is the headline. You know, we've talked about his knee probably more than any subject over the last 3 years, unfortunately, and just his injuries in general for the last 8 years or whatever. I'm sure it's probably the biggest topic.
In Buxton's knee or Kirilloff's wrist, as we've talked about.
Now it's Kirilloff's shoulder,
too. In terms of MVP votes, that would be the number one and number two. We've got a clear winner, and then we've got a good second one. Yeah, right. And then half step above the rest.
And then Terry Doyle is number 3. There's a reference for a long time.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So with Buxton, you know, the way they expressed this one was that they've kind of been searching for what the problem is here.
Right. Yes.
You know, he had the surgery on his knee, which they initially described as a cleanup last year, a little earlier this last year, but roughly, 13 months ago or something like that. And then just wasn't ready, like was at spring training and not through any fault of his. Like he works his ass off by all accounts.
Sure.
It's not like he's skipping rehab or anything.
Right.
But they came in the middle of spring training. They basically said, well, he's not ready to play center. We're going to have him as the DH just because we'd like him to start the season. And then he just never was ready to play center. So then the question becomes, well, will he ever be able to play center field? Because being a full-time DH didn't really necessarily work. Yeah. And so the hope is, there's been some talk of a cyst in his knee. Now there's this talk of the plica kind of flap that leads to some difficulty that not everyone has in their knee, but he does have. I think certainly they're at the point where they're like, why does this continue to be a problem? It's not like he's got a torn ACL.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that these aren't very serious issues.
Yeah, you don't know exactly what is causing the irritation, that's causing the inflammation, that's causing the pain. And so their best guess right now on that is this.
Yes.
It's, it's an arthroscopic knee surgery. It's not a big major, we're cutting open the knee to kind of get in there and clean stuff out.
You hope.
We hope, right?
Yeah.
I just went through arthroscopic knee surgery. It was not the same thing. But the point is that it is something that is, you can recover very quickly from it.
Yeah, you were drinking. You were doing bar hopping literally 2 days later.
I was doing 2 days. I don't think Buxton's going to be.
No, something tells me.
If he needs to consult with me, that's what I would probably recommend.
Yeah, if you see him at, what's the Irish place?
Finnegan's.
Finnegan's,
yeah.
If you see him at Finnegan's,
you'll know he's following the bonus plan for.
It worked for you?
I would recommend going up to the Northeast Palace, watching NATO Coles. That's what I did 2 days.
Yeah, great. This is what I would recommend for anyone who's looking at
singing Tom Petty and the Replacements
to go insane with their bad knee. Don't take the Gleeman plan, because the Gleeman plan is
ignore it.
Byron will weigh 350. He'll have to be a DH, not because of his knee, but because he can't run anymore. So that's where they're at with that. Those are two very important players.
Yes.
But they're also two players whose importance, because of, like you said, with Kirilloff, this is now the third major arm surgery, call it, in 3 years for him.
Yeah.
The first two being wrist. And with Buxton, it's, the second knee surgery in 2 years, but also probably like the 8th overall surgery.
Yeah.
And so these are two theoretically extremely important, building block players, but they're no longer being viewed as that because of the injuries. Yeah. And so
on the one hand, you don't want to block either of them at a position. Right. On the other hand, you don't want to count on either of them for a position.
So it's tricky.
Yeah.
I think, that's where we talked about Michael Taylor stepping in center field. I think they will certainly, whether it's re-signing Taylor, which I think should be doable, going with Willie Castro more in center, going with someone like Austin Martin in center, or finding a new version of Michael Taylor, a veteran, short-term, center fielder. They need that. You cannot enter, and they know this. I mean, this is one of the things they talked about on last Friday. You cannot enter spring training or even like get to the new year
saying Byron Buxton is going to be our starting center
right,
fielder.
because you just know that's not, even in a best case scenario, he's not going to play 125 games in center field.
Exactly.
I mean, let's be honest. Right. There's much less chance of that than there is of him playing 0 games in center field.
Yes, right.
And so you need to plan accordingly. And I thought last offseason, for the first time, the Twins did plan accordingly. It wasn't just Jake Cave as the backup center fielder. They stopped hoping that Buxton would be the center fielder and instead actually made moves with Taylor to ensure that when he isn't the starting center fielder, we actually have a starting caliber center fielder. And I think they absolutely must do that again this offseason, and I think they will. With Kirilloff, you can sort of say the same thing, except he was productive for stretches this year. I mean, he was one of their best hitters for about 2 months. Yeah. But also first base is tricky because the difficulty of replacing Buxton is that you need that specific skill set, which Taylor offered. You can't just plug and play any outfielder. Sure. Particularly, Kepler doesn't slide over to center. Right. You could try someone like Gallo, but you don't really want to do that. Obviously Wallner's not going to be in center, all that. But at first base, you could pretty much slide anybody you want over there. Now, it might take a little work, but I mean, ultimately they started playing Julian there. It took a while. Arise, Sano, Mauer. I mean, first base, you can put almost anybody there. They might not be Keith Hernandez, Gold Glove winning, Doug Minkiewicz, but they're passable. And so that makes it, I think, even trickier with Kirilloff because with Buxton, you may kind of hold on to this last notion of, well, if we can just get him as a part-time center fielder that has so much value, because replacing him in center field is difficult. But with Kirilloff, he's not going to be a part-time anything. I mean, he might be a platoon player, but what I mean is he's not going to be part of like some rotation at first base. He's either going to be healthy enough and good enough to play first base, or you're going to find a different first baseman.
Well, either he hits well enough that you find a place to put him into the lineup, or you don't.
What I mean is like you don't go, well, we'll find like an okay first baseman and keep the door open for you. Either have to kind of buy into Kirilloff or don't, because that's not a position you can afford to get a lack of production at. Yes, because everyone else in the league is getting 20 homers from first base minimally, basically. I do think this year worked out pretty well in terms of platooning Kirilloff. He played mostly against righties with Solano, a veteran right-handed bat who played a lot, but primarily against lefties. Solano's 36. He didn't finish great, but he had a really solid season. I think that role paired with Kirilloff works pretty well. And then Solano was also a backup like at third and second. I think, you could re-sign Solano just like you could re-sign Taylor. He's certainly not going to cost a lot at 37. Right. No, you're right. Or you could just try to find an upgrade on Solano or internally try to find someone. I think Jose Miranda, as a right-handed first baseman who can play a little third base,
he'd be nice.
Could fill the Solano role, except he's every bit of an injury question mark for the exact same shoulder situation as Kirilloff. So that's, center field and first base are definitely things you're going to hear us talk about a lot as we look at like free agents and trade options and the depth chart and stuff.
But not necessarily top end of any either of those positions.
More of a Taylor, Solano. That's what they need, basically, is good role players who, if you have to push them into a bigger role, they can swim more than sink.
And I mean, just so we're clear, Solano signed 1 week into spring training. Yes. That's when they decided
for
to address
$2 million.
And so I would not be shocked if we get into February and we still don't know who the first baseman. In part because they want to see what Kirilloff's situation looks like 3 weeks, and Miranda as well. So both of those moves. I mean, center field could be much the same way. They made a trade for Taylor. They didn't even sign him. They traded it for him in January?
Yeah,
late
something
January?
like that.
Yeah. So
okay. So the other, I don't know. They talked about Sonny Gray's free agency, but again, we talked a lot about this on the Patreon. The biggest thing for me, other than the injury stuff we just talked about,
payroll.
Well, yeah, we'll get to the payroll. But the other thing was Louis Varland, which they mentioned him on two different fronts, and they were asked about him specifically. But first, they talked about him as, well, okay, Sonny Gray is a free agent and Kenta Maeda is a free agent. Where does that leave your rotation kind of heading into the offseason? And Falvey listed off. He said, well, we got 5 guys. If we needed to start today,
we've got them.
We got it. We got Lopez and Ryan and Ober and Paddock, who they're really counting on, and Louis Varland, number 5. And then about 3 minutes later, someone said, well, what role, does this mean Varland is just going right back to starting?
And then Baldelli said.
Baldelli was like, well, I don't know. We got to talk to him because the guy looked, well,
Baldelli was clearly very excited about how
Yes.
Louis Varland looked.
He was
as a reliever.
enthused to the point of cursing about how good Louis Varland looked and performed, not just looked.
Yes, right.
He had an 18-1 strikeout to walk ratio in like 13 innings or something as a reliever. But I mean, he was throwing 98, 99 with the fastball. His cutter was fantastic at like 91, 92. It was just missing bats. He just has such power stuff, and that's exactly what they thought he would look like as a reliever. They started talking about shifting him to the bullpen in August. But Varland at the time said, well, I kind of want to talk to them about the long-term outlook here because I'd like to remain a starter.
Right.
First of all, I think I can be a good starter, which the Twins think he can be a good starter.
Falvey certainly still believes he can be a good starter.
Falvey
and I think Baldelli does too.
Was much more sort of holding the cards close to the vest here, basically saying, well, if the season started right now, he'd be our fifth starter. Right. So clearly we view him as a potential starter. Right. But I think Baldelli, who maybe has a shorter-term view of the situation, sees a guy who throws like that out of the bullpen, and he's licking his chops because he's starting to say, well, hell, I can pitch the eighth inning
for me right now.
Right.
Yep.
And so I think that's...
Pry that gun from my cold, dead hand.
Yes, basically. It's an interesting, kind of philosophical debate if it ends up being this way, which is, I think right now Louis Varland would be penciled in as their fifth starter. But I do think most likely, whether it's re-signing Gray, re-signing Maeda, or trying to get a veteran along those same lines via trade or free agency, the odds of those five being their five starters on opening day are very slim. I think at the very least they will try to bring in a Gray replacement.
50%,
right.
Probably,
And so once that happens, if you bring in one starter, then Louis Varland becomes your sixth starter.
Right.
And the sixth starter, as we saw with Bailey Ober this year, probably starts the year in St. Paul at AAA.
Perhaps.
So then the discussion becomes not only long term, is he better off? Is he more valuable to you as a starter or a reliever? But even then in the short term, it's, well, if you're Louis Varland and you want to be a starter, would you rather be a starter at AAA or a reliever in the majors? Right. And that's a different question than would you rather be a starter or a reliever? So it's an interesting, I don't know. I think they view, at least I'll say how I view him as a starter, which is I have no doubt he can be a good starter in the major leagues. I do have some doubt given his lack of, third and fourth pitch, basically, and some of the homer issues he's had, which you can trace back to that.
Yep.
Can he be more than like a good? Can he be more
than a
like
rotation,
a good third or fourth starter? Right. Which, by the way, those guys make $15 million a year in free agency.
That's right, yes.
Those guys, without those guys, you don't make playoffs.
Right.
But can he be like a true playoff caliber starter? Can he be a number two starter type of guy? Can he be closer to a Sonny Gray than I don't know, a fifth or sixth starter? Right. That I don't know. I mean, I think it's possible he can, but I think it's also possible he can't. Whereas I tend to think, and clearly Baldelli thinks this, and I suspect most of the Twins decision makers think this.
He's already shown that he can do that. Yeah, right.
Because relief pitching you can boil it down to much simpler terms. It's not about does this guy have durability? Can he go through a lineup 3 times? How's his third pitch? All this stuff. With relief pitching, a lot of the time, it's just, does he have one dominant pitch and one second pitch that's pretty good?
Right. He
can probably be a relief pitcher. And in Varland's case, you see a guy throwing 99 and he's got a good cutter. It's like there's no math that needs to be done here. He can be a good reliever right now, and he already is. And so that, I think, is another key. That may not reveal itself in terms of their actual thinking unless or until they kind of complete their shopping for the winter.
Yeah. I feel to me like another question that's going to be answered real late, potentially in spring training.
Right. I mean, if they add 2 veteran starters and he's 7th on the starting pitcher depth chart, then,
it could be. Yep.
If they don't add any veteran relievers, then you're starting to go, I think he'll be in the bullpen. And then the last thing, we'll just touch on this very briefly because we talked about this for like a half hour on the Patreon. And we actually talked about it then on the next Patreon. Somebody asked mailbag questions about the TV situation.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
But, this time of year, guys like us try to project the payroll for next year and kind of where the books stand in terms of guaranteed salaries, arbitration, options, and all that.
We will probably have a Patreon episode where we we go completely through the Twins payroll situation, how much it is.
That's the type of BS we spend an hour on Patreon. So if you're thinking, what do they do on Patreon? Right. But it's trickier than ever this year. They're never super revealing about it. Right. But usually you can at least say, well, what was the payroll this year? That'll probably at least be the payroll next year. Right. But for the first time, that may not be the case because their television contract expired. Re-upping with Bally is I think, probably a non-starter because 2 months ago, Bally was trying not to pay them on the existing contract.
Right.
Also,
Yes.
Bally's in bankruptcy.
Right.
Diamond Sports, Sinclair Broadcast Group, but that's Bally.
They can't come to an agreement on the streaming rights.
And so it's
been
why
a
would you re-up with them?
Yeah. And for years, they haven't even offered streaming rights to any
Right.
additional
It's just a
partners.
mess.
Bally.
I mean, the
Right.
whole industry is in chaos,
Right.
essentially.
Correct.
Local sports broadcasting.
Yeah, the Twins are having the same problem with Bally Sports North that multiple other teams are having with various Bally affiliates. Right.
But then you go, okay, so their contract is up, which is good timing. You would hate to still be under contract for 5 more years with Bally. But their contract is up, and this was a multi-year contract. Like, this happened before the Bally fell apart.
Right.
Then you go, well, what's their where can they jump to? And there are no doubt options locally, but I don't know that there's any options looking to pay. Because Bally, we found out, because Dave St. Peter had to testify at a bankruptcy trial, paid them $55 million a year to broadcast Twins games locally. Well, I can almost assure you that
I can assure you,
whether they re-up with Bally, whether they find a different local channel to go to, whether they go purely streaming, whether they go under MLB's umbrella, which the Padres and Diamondbacks have done, and other teams may do, or whether they just offer a standalone streaming product, which some teams may try to do. They ain't going to make $55 million off it next year. Maybe in the future it grows to the point that you're making as much or more, but immediately it's in so much chaos, you're just not going to make the same money. Well, if you go from making $55 million, which is about, 20% of their overall revenue, roughly, something like that, and let's say you make $25 million instead. Well, that missing $30 million in revenue is going to lower the payroll or make it less likely that you're going to maintain payroll. Because theoretically, you spend about 50% of revenue on payroll, or you should be at least. And so if
even a postseason run and additional season tickets and all
I actually
that
asked
stuff.
about that.
Yep.
Somebody who would know. How much do you make off the postseason? Because they had, they have four
games?
playoff games.
Yep.
They were like, well, look, it helps. But it's not going to make up for the gap.
$50 million.
$55 million,
No, it's
right?
gonna
Or
be,
even
right.
$20 million. I mean, it's single millions,
Right.
not
Yes.
double-digit millions and all that. And so that, to me, is the biggest question. Because if you look, the Twins spent roughly $155, $158 million this year, which was a franchise record. It was 17th in baseball. We used to, moan a lot about the payroll, but we've kind of ceased doing that. I mean, obviously, any fan of any team wants that team to spend more.
Sure.
And I do think there's an argument for just saying, y'all are billionaires. What do you care? Spend an extra $10 million. But to me, given the market size and their revenues of Minnesota, being dead average, just exactly average, 17 out of 30, which is just average, seems reasonable to me for Minnesota. And it's also pretty consistently number 2 in the American League Central, which is who they're competing with. If they were to be able to maintain this year's payroll, and not even usually year over year, you're getting a small, increase in spending just because, same as everything increases year over year.
In general, across Major League Baseball, salaries climb 10 to 15, or overall payroll for the 30 teams climbs, 5 to 10 to 15%, something like that, right?
So even if they said, because of this uncertain television situation and the likely drop in local TV revenue, at least short term, that we're going to experience, the payroll is not going to rise. Right. We're going to maintain it at like 155, 158, 160 or something like that. They have plenty of spending room if that were the case. They're going to have within that probably 40 or 50 million. Yeah. Now, you're losing Gray. You need to find a starting pitcher. I mean, that can get spent in a hurry. But
I've got about 30 to 40, but yeah, keep going.
They're not up against it if they maintain the same payroll. However, if they went from making $55 million off local TV to making $30 million off local TV, and that $25 million in lost revenue equaled $10 or $15 million in declined payroll, suddenly you've got $25 or $30 million to spend. You need to spend half that at least on just replacing Sonny Gray and maybe replacing Kenta Maeda, let alone trying to find a new center fielder, trying to find a first baseman. Then it starts to go in a hurry. Yes. And so that's why it's relevant. But again, these are one of these. I got the sense from Falvey that he's not even – there's so much uncertainty from their end, and they obviously have much more information than us. This is just a chaotic environment to try to be figuring this out.
Well, and you've got also, you've got Joe Pollette in charge now instead of Jim Pollette. I'm not suggesting there's going to be a whole big difference in terms of what they do. But the fact that they made a little bit of a postseason run, are they willing to maybe, risk an extra $10 million in payroll above what they would normally be comfortable with just to cover that which they might lose from that's a possibility as well. One of the things that Falvey kind of has talked about is, when they have the conversation with ownership, they will say, we can put payroll at this level, or this level, and here's what the difference is going to be in terms of what we can provide and get and so on. And let's pick which one it is. And maybe in this particular case, even given the fact that you've got declining revenues from TV revenue, they say, you know what? Given those three options, we're gonna invest a little more in it because we feel like this is the year that we've got the fans behind us because they've actually seen some postseason run. They're going to start believing the regular season a little more.
Yeah, if they asked us, which they never would. But if they asked us, that is certainly the case I would present.
This is the time to probably lean into it a little bit.
Look, it's easy to spend other people's money. I get that.
Yes.
But $10 million to the Pollard family means nothing. I understand they try to operate within a business structure and try not to lose money. Right. I would argue you're in no danger of that. The asset you bought 40 years ago for $50 million is now worth $2 billion. Yeah. So even if you were to lose a little bit year over year, it's worth so much more. But within that,
cash flow is a different thing than total value.
But they're not hurting on that regard. This family's in no danger of having to scrounge for quarters in the in the car, couch, or the car's cushions. But within that, I have no problem with the team operating within kind of the self-imposed, but the kind of overall financial structure that we described, which is if you make $300 million in revenue. You probably should be looking to spend roughly 150 or maybe a little more on payroll. And I think the Twins have at least gotten to a point under Falvey, and I give Falvey credit for this compared to Terry Ryan, because Terry Ryan did not push for extra spending. And Falvey basically tries to figure out how much can we spend and then spends to the penny what that is. Right. Whereas Terry Ryan seemed to have a weird sense of pride in handing $20 million back to ownership, which I never quite understood. But within that financial structure, though,
that's where your job security comes from. I can kind of understand it.
Yeah, okay. But your job security could also just come from winning. But yes, what you said is 100% the case I would make, and I suspect Falvey will make the case. And I suspect Joe Pohlad, who was around the team every day and was on the field for all the playoffs and all that, he has a sense of how much different the vibe was at the end of this season versus past seasons, and we want to keep this rolling and all that. But I would say there is a huge difference from just like a perception or fan morale standpoint from maintaining payroll year over year, which technically is a lowering of payroll relative to the league. Right. Although across the league, there are so many weird television situations that you might see league-wide payroll decline a little bit. But there's a big difference versus saying, hey, our television situation is bad. We're expecting our revenue to go down. We're just going to keep the payroll at the same level. Versus lowering it.
Right, yes.
And that might be somewhat semantic because even keeping it at the same level is technically kind of lowering it.
Although maybe not this year. Because they might not be climbing league-wide because so many other teams are dealing with the same issue.
I just think the moment that people realize, if this were the stance they would try to take, that you realize that, hey, they spend $158 million this year, they're only looking to spend $145 million next year. Well, there's a reason behind that, and we can talk about the logic of it like we've been doing, and that's going to convince some fans, but not most fans, nor should it convince some fans. I think there's just a massive difference in perception between maintaining and lowering. And I also think there's an even bigger perception of if they said, what you kind of suggested, what's $10 million to us in the grand scheme of things? Let's try to keep this momentum rolling. Let's try to keep this train rolling. We finally broke through. There's finally the dark cloud is lifted of this fan base. The attendance started to climb. People are back into it. There's an opportunity for us to keep winning this division and actually make some playoff noise. And the entire morale of this fan base can climb considerably. So
the time to invest in a team is open. The competitive window is open. The championship window is open.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think there would be huge value in saying, look, we can even talk publicly about what a mess this television situation is, and we're going to lose revenue. And they could lay it out in very easy terms. They could do an interview with the Strib or with the Athletic or whatever and lay that out and then say, you know what? Screw it. Our revenue's down $30 million. We could easily use that to drop payroll by $15 million. Not only are we not going to drop payroll, we're going to raise payroll. Right. it's going to be $165 million. It's going to be $170 million. And in the grand scheme of things, that means nothing to the people who own the team. But I think it could have such an outsized impact on fan morale and perception and momentum. Not to mention, you may
bring in a really good playoff starter, like
exactly.
That's what's going to impact the fan momentum. They're not going to care how much you're spending. They're going to care about, does that mean now we're a player for whoever?
Yes. Instead of signing Donovan Solano to platoon at first base, you signed fill in the blank to Reese Hoskins or something like that.
Right. Exactly.
Whatever.
Right. Yes. Right.
Or you re-sign Michael Taylor for $8 million instead of trying to find some guy for $2 million or something. Whatever it is. And so I think that's they might not know this television situation for a while. I mean, they knew this was coming, so they've been negotiating, but it's a very tricky spot. Okay.
One other thing that came out of there was, real quick, we did ask about whether or not the coaching staff would return, and in general, what they basically said is we're open to everybody returning, but there's always the possibility that somebody gets hired away. And so a couple days later, we got some potential news about Thad Levine being interviewed for the general manager job of the Boston Red Sox. And so our Patreon, throughout the year we were doing Monday, Wednesdays. On Wednesdays, we've often been doing a mailbag. We started that episode with a episode about the Thad Levine news, right? And so what we're going to play for you next is a 14-minute discussion.
Just a little taste of the type of discussion we have on the Patreon side about Thad Levine and Derek Falvey and the Boston Red Sox and the front office structure of the Minnesota Twins.
That's right.
That's what you're about to hear right now. Well, just the background on Thad Levine. He's been the Twins general manager. Now, it's confusing to people. I still see this actually a decent amount where people talk about Thad Levine. I think like very casual fans maybe talk about Thad Levine. I don't mean that as a pejorative, by the way, when I say very casual fans. I just mean, talk about him as if he's running things. Because for many years, the title of general manager, and it's still true in some sports,
absolutely,
is the guy who runs the front office. In baseball, because there's been like a title inflation over the last 10 or 15 years in baseball, most teams now generally, and this actually was in the news recently with Kim Ng from the Marlins, who stepped down because she was the general manager, and they tried to bring someone in above her, basically. But for the most part now, the general manager on most teams is second in command. And the number one in command is some title resembling president of baseball operations or something like that. Right. And so that's been true with the Twins since, November of 2016, prior to the 2017 season when they replaced Terry Ryan and company with Falvey and Levine. They came as a package. Yep. And Falvey was the president of baseball operations. Actually, I think it was a slightly different title then, but that's his title now. He was the number one guy. They brought him
at the time. He was CBO. Chief of Baseball Operations. Right. That's right. Yeah.
He was brought in from Cleveland.
Sometimes right. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not right
I like
anymore.
Now, because so many now, you used to be able to just call, as someone who's been writing about this for 20 years, you used to pretty reliably just call them general manager, and you can't do that now. And so some of them are CBO, some of them are president of baseball ops, some of them are vice president of,
Now I can just remember POBO.
Yeah, that works. I just say front office boss. That works. Like final boss in a video game. Yeah. But so they brought in Falvey from Cleveland, and he took the number one spot, the top spot. And then they brought in at the same time in tandem Thad Levine from the Texas Rangers, where he had been assistant general manager back in the day when that meant you were the number two guy under John Daniels for a decade. And they made 2 World Series. Right. And so Thad Levine has been the number 2 front office person for almost 20 years now between Texas and Minnesota. He's probably won, 8 division titles. He's made the playoffs that many times. He's got 2 World Series on his resume. He's been one of the more successful kind of right-hand men or number 2 guys in these front offices in both spots. He's turned down, I know he turned down an interview with the Phillies a while back when they ended up hiring Dombrowski. Huh. He turned down the Mets last offseason or the offseason before. I know the Tigers tried to talk to him. These are just ones that have been reported. I mean, sometimes we don't even hear about this stuff. And he's turned them down to stay with the Twins. Now, this time, Chad Jennings, who's the Athletics Red Sox writer and also my past and future spring training roommate, at the condo in Fort Myers that we share with the Red Sox writers.
Have I played trivia with him?
Probably, yeah.
Probably.
Great, tremendous guy.
Yeah.
Couldn't be luckier.
Right. Probably part of one of the winning teams of Fort Myers.
Probably.
Trivia,
yeah.
Brewing Trivia.
He's a smart guy.
Right.
One of the great guys I've met.
One of the champions. He's clearly a champion.
Yes. He's a champion. He's a champion of something. At breweries, yes, undeniably, he's a champion, just like you, John. But he reported alongside Dan Hayes, who also is a champion at breweries for other reasons, that Thad Levine had. Well, first of all, they reported, and I'm going to give Dan credit this too, because obviously this was a Red Sox report, sort of, because it was about the Red Sox job, because they fired Chaim Bloom, who they had hired 3 years ago from the Rays to be the top guy. But the Red Sox go through front offices like it's nothing. Think of it. They had the Theo Epstein, they had the Ben Sherrington, then they had Dombrowski, and he won a World Series, and they canned him a year later. Then they hire a guy from Tampa who was very well respected, and 3 years later they fire him. The initial report that Jennings and Hayes had was that the Red Sox reached out to Derek Falvey, who is from Massachusetts and went to school, I believe, in Massachusetts. And he turned them down even to do an interview because he's staying here. Yeah. And I will say
that surprised me a little bit.
I'm not surprised by that. In general, you rarely see a lateral move once you reach the top spot of a Major League Baseball organization. It's kind of like in the NFL or something. You rarely see a head coach change hands unless there's like some draft pick compensation or something like that. It's not that it can't happen, but it's like it's kind of understood. I mean, the majority of people who get hired are either number one, people whose contracts are up or who get fired, like Dombrowski, let's say, or for instance, David Stearns, who's been running the Brewers, his contract was up, and the Mets jumped in and poached him. Right. Or number two or three people for successful organizations, which was Falvey, which was Levine, same thing. So they get turned down for an interview by Falvey, and then they say, well, how about Thad? Right. And he accepted an interview, and I'm told was there Monday in Boston, might still be there, who knows. So he went through with the interview process. Now, does that mean he's going to get offered the job? No. I mean, they definitely are interviewing other people. There was also, Chad Jennings wrote, they reached out like their first 2 or 3 people. They tried to hire a guy from the Dodgers. They tried to hire, and they were turned down by Falvey, by Brandon Gomes from the Dodgers. And so, they kind of had to expand the net a little bit, like widen the net a little bit. Sure. And Thad Levine's an East Coast guy. He went to school, I think, in Haverford, which is what, Pennsylvania?
That is a suburb of Philadelphia. It's Havertown. Okay. I've lived in Havertown.
Yeah.
I lived there. When we got married, that was where we spent our
time. But with that said, he's been living in Texas for a decade. First, before that, he was with the Rockies, so he lived in Colorado. Right. Then he lived in Texas. Now he's been living in Minnesota. So I don't know that the East Coast draw for a 50-year-old guy with a family is that huge, but maybe a factor. It's a little surprising to me just in the sense that he's turned down some pretty high-profile jobs. I mean, Phillies, Mets. Sure. I don't mean turned down like they offered it to him, but turned down a chance to even interview for it. But, things change. Obviously, the Red Sox are among the better jobs that they've won multiple World Series.
Right. They've got lots of resources.
Yes. Right. They've got a lot of money. I'm sure they're willing to pay the front office pretty well. But, it's interesting. I think a lot of people see that it cuts both ways, right? Like, because during the Terry Ryan, Ron Gardenhire 15-year run, no members of the coaching staff were, as far as I know, ever poached, which is absolutely remarkable for a team that won 6 division titles in 10 years or whatever it was. They didn't lose a single hitting coach, pitching coach, third base coach, nobody.
Right. Yeah.
And there was only, that I can remember, one front office departure, which was Wayne Krivsky, was the assistant general manager, got hired as the Reds GM, like about midway through the early 2000s run.
Who went to Colorado? Wasn't there one of the Twins officials ended up becoming the GM of Colorado?
Not that I can remember. I mean, Dan O'Dowd, but that was long before that.
Okay.
And Krivsky lasted 3 years in Cincinnati. Didn't go well, and he actually came right back to the same job with the Twins. Yep. That's remarkably little front office and coaching losses or personnel losses. The Twins, we've seen much different than that. Almost immediately, Falvey Falvey and Levine took over in 2017, they lost, I remember Jeff Pickler, they've lost Derek Shelton, James Rowson, Jeremy Hefner. I'm forgetting multiple people.
Right,
I mean, like on the coaching side, they've lost a bunch of people. And so it makes sense that Thad Levine, I mean, I can tell you before he even got here, Thad Levine was a guy who would pop up in articles of like future GM or future whatever. Right. And now he is a GM, but they meant like future number one guys. So it doesn't surprise me that they would pursue him. I mean, certainly he's overqualified to be a guy who can lead a front office. He's essentially been leading front offices for 20 years. In terms of the impact that it would have on the Twins, I mean, I do think that Falvey is very clearly the number one guy in this front office. Sure. It's not a division. It's not a left-hand, right-hand type of thing. And that's not to say Thad Levine hasn't done a lot of heavy lifting in a very important role.
Or that Falvey doesn't lean on Levine a lot.
I mean, they're very connected. Falvey is, he trusts him with everything. Right. But I think even more than, this was the case when they came here in 2017, but I think it's certainly become more true. The buck stops with Falvey. And I think
it used to be that Levine was sort of the spokesman of
the club
funny for the first couple of years.
You're right, and it's funny
now it's completely opposite.
Right,
yeah.
We get so many questions about this every month of every year for the past like 3 or 4 years, and it's always the question is always. And I got ones today about this, and we've talked about it. You're right. The question is always. Doesn't it seem like Thad Levine was very much public facing or doing interviews and stuff early on, and that it seems like suddenly that's changed, except we've been getting those emails for 4 years.
Right, yeah.
So it can't be suddenly.
No.
I think it's as simple as when Falvey took this job, he had essentially no experience being a public facing. He was the number 3 guy in Cleveland.
Right, yeah. Maybe.
He hadn't done any of these interviews, whereas Thad Levine's been in front of a camera, and also it's just his personality.
Yeah, he's excellent at it.
I used to do,
absolutely excellent.
When I was at Baseball Prospectus, I think we did it 3 years in a row. You were at one of them. I remember. Yeah. We did a Baseball Prospectus night at Target Field, and part of it was a pregame interview with Thad Levine. Yeah. And you basically just put a quarter in Thad and wind him up, and he goes for an hour.
That's it, yeah.
And I tell this story all the time. My girlfriend, and we were only 2-3 years into dating at that point. She was there for one of them, sitting in the front row, and I got my phone on the table. I'm interviewing Thad Levine because I have my questions on my phone. All of a sudden, it starts rattling, and I look. And it's from Becky, and it says, "He's so charming." And I almost stopped it, and I was like, "Man, what?"
You just say to him, "Could you be less charming?"
Yes, I probably did say that, actually. I'm pretty sure I did. But anyway, he likes to talk. But I do think it's as simple as, and actually, Thad will still call into KFan. He's still on CCO. He's certainly around. Yeah, yes. I will tell you, if you need to talk to Thad Levine as a beat writer, you can find Thad Levine. I talk to him we see him all the time. He's on the field for BP. He's not, that hasn't changed. But I think what has changed is Falvey's just much more comfortable.
Yes.
And that was pretty quickly apparent. But if you have 2 guys and one of them's been in front of the camera 1,000,000 times and one of them's never been in front of the camera, when you get started, the guy who's been in front of the camera 1,000,000 times is probably going to take a higher share of that. So I wouldn't read much of anything into that. I will say, though, that being a great number 2 guy doesn't necessarily mean you'll be a great number 1 guy, nor should it necessarily mean you strive to be a number 1 guy.
Sure.
Like, just because Scottie Pippen is the greatest number 2 of all time doesn't mean he should have strived to get traded and go to his own team and start on his own. And, the things that Falvey has to do as the number 1 guy, like I said, he has to make tough decisions, and he has to be the final gavel on a lot of these. Sure. And he has to tell people, we're going to cut you. We're not going to re-sign you. He has to go to ownership and ask for more money. Like, there are certain difficult aspects of this job that in practice are harder than just being a big voice in the room. When there's 3 or 4 big voices in the room and you guys make a decision, you don't collectively go tell ownership that. It's Falvey going to tell ownership that. So I think that, in terms of what would they miss if Thad Levine were to get this job and take this job with the Red Sox, they would miss a lot. I mean, they would have to replace him probably internally. It would probably be either Daniel Adler or Jeremy Zoll, who are the 2 assistant GMs, although they have some other options there from the player development side that they could bump up the ladder. But it wouldn't fundamentally alter the very top of this thing, because the guy who makes the real decisions and the guy who is running this, truly the final boss of this front office, turned down an interview and is in it for the long haul here with with Falvey, I would say. So I don't know. I don't get the sense that that Levine is considered like a favorite for this job or anything, but certainly the fact that he flew out there and interviewed, he's part of the process at the very least.
I mean, it's being reported. Like, it's one of the things that say.
Yes. So that, I don't know. Hopefully, we'll obviously next week or something, we should have a lot more clarity one way or the other on this. I'm assuming. I mean, maybe they could drag their feet on it a little bit, but it's good, I would say.
I think that might not be the last thing we hear about, somebody being poached from this front office or from this coaching staff.
We talked about it coming off last Friday's media session with Falvey and Levine, where they basically said, we're bringing the whole coaching staff back, except we might not have control over that. If someone wants to hire Jace Tingler as the manager, he's not going to stay here as the bench coach, if you're offered a promotion.
Sure.
I think
we would love to have everybody back. We're not sure everybody will be back. Right.
Okay. So that's Thad Levine.
So that was us talking about Thad Levine on the Patreon.
The world has changed considerably in these last 14 minutes now. It's all gone to hell. No.
We always recommend that you join the Patreon. This the way it's going to work in the off season is we're going to be doing, I think, a Patreon most Mondays. Starting with this upcoming Monday, we're going to have a special guest.
Yes, a first-time guest.
A first-time
people have been calling for.
That's right. Mailbag. We do mailbags on the Patreons. We do special guests. We're going to do some deep dives. Like I think that payroll talk that we're going to be having is on that.
And it will also be home for any emergency shows when they start making moves, trades, free agent signings, which we're also then going to move. We've been doing the free show that you're listening to right now, typically on Fridays. Release it Friday late morning, basically. We're going to shift that most of the time to Thursdays, which means you can then listen to it Friday morning if you want. On your
Thursday
commute.
Night or Friday afternoon.
Just to kind of, because we do dial back the frequency of the podcast overall from like 3 a week to 1 or 2 a week. And so that's going to be the spacing on it.
So we will continue to do free podcasts throughout the off season. We do know of a couple that we're going to probably have to switch to some traveling and some holidays and stuff that
John's,
are going on.
Thinking he's going to be in Philly for the World Series. So although after last night,
I know.
Who knows? Before we finish up here with our review of how stupid we are with our over-unders, let's talk about our last couple sponsors here.
Game Time app to get tickets. Don't go to the website to get tickets. Use the Game Time app to get tickets. I've been using it since 2019, long before they were a sponsor of ours. We were using the Game Time app, and we were doing it because it was easy to get tickets to Twin. Honestly, most of the time I've been using it for Twins games, although I have absolutely used it for Wild games. I have used it for Vikings games.
Yeah, and also the concerts and shows and stuff.
Yeah, it works absolutely.
Their specialties are hard to find tickets. Yeah. And then just last-minute tickets, which John will often buy them as he's walking to Target Field.
Absolutely.
You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Again, it's just an app on your phone. You download the Game Time app, you create an account, and then just use the code Gleeman, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Just create an account, redeem the code Gleeman, get $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
And then our second sponsor is Stamps, Stamps.com. Nobody wants to go to the post office, Aaron Gleeman. And we're going to the holiday season. You know what I have to do in the holiday season a lot of the time?
Send out a lot of presents.
I have to go to the post office. Yeah, I don't like it.
I was a power user of Stamps.com a few years ago when I was sending out autographed copies of my book. And without Stamps.com, I probably would have been driven even more insane because I would have been standing at the post office every day, basically. Instead, you can package and weigh and put postage on. Yeah. Just drop it in the mailbox. It's amazing. You can also, you end up saving money because you can do exact postage instead of slapping on 4 stamps and overpaying there. You can get a scale and measure stuff if you're going to be sending out a lot of packages. I know some people are running small businesses and stuff, and this would really come in handy. And then the other thing that I used that I liked a lot was you can track each package because they'll give you like a code or a number, and then you can actually see if something's delivered, which again, if you're running a small business or you're sending something out of state and you want to know that it gets delivered. So here's all you do. You can give your business the gift of Stamps.com. So your mailing and shipping is covered this holiday season. Sign up go to Stamps.com and then sign up with the promo code Gleeman.
No, Geek.
Geek, you're right.
Yeah.
Promo code Geek. Sign up with the promo code Geek.
Come on, yeah.
GEEK.
Yep. For a special offer that includes a 4-week trial, plus free postage and a digital scale. No long-term commitment or contract. Just go to Stamps.com, you'll see it at the top. You click a microphone at the top of the page.
Yeah, there's like a picture of a microphone.
And then you enter the code GEEK, and then we get credits for it, and you get a great deal. You get the 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale.
GEEK. Geek.
Geek. There you go.
Time John got the spotlight.
All right.
You can have it, brother.
It is time. Speaking of the spotlight.
Now let's talk about how stupid we are for a change.
Yeah.
All right. So if you've been listening, you know we do this basically every year,
right.
Both coming and going. But every middle of spring training, usually we do, I think, something like that, sometime in March.
Yeah. March 17th was this time when we released it. Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Middle of spring training. Yep. We look at the American
League. You're welcome to go back and listen to that episode as well.
Yeah, if you really need proof of how dumb we are. But I will get the point across. Trust me. And we go through all 15 American League teams. Obviously, we focus more on the AL Central. But we go through all the American League teams, and it's our way of just kind of previewing the American League, previewing the potential playoff picture, previewing the division that the Twins are in, and then also just, putting our money where our mouth is a little bit and saying, this is what we think.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's anybody.
And then we track it, and then we report it at the end of the year.
Anybody can say what they think if it disappears into the ether. And 6 months later.
And we like doing it this way because it provides an objective number to be. There's not a lot of rhetoric around it. We started doing it because our very first year of the podcast, we were arguing about whether or not the Detroit Tigers were going to be any good. And my point is, they're not going to be as good as people thought they are going to be. And you thought, oh no, they're going to be every bit as good. And it turns out I had a different number of what I thought everybody thought they were.
We both thought they were going to win like 92 games.
No, 80, it was 80.5 for me and 89.5 for you. Is what we basically said was the number. We're like, well. Okay, so we basically agree. We've just been arguing about this stupid thing because we didn't have an objective number. So this gives us an objective number.
Arguing about a stupid thing, John?
Believe.
It's impossible.
Yeah, I know.
Inconceivable. Okay, so the way it works is on, March 17th, we went and pulled the Las Vegas, it was like, Bovada or BetMGM or whatever we used.
Yep.
The over-under win totals for teams, which will always have a 0.5.
Right.
So it'll always be not 85, it'll be 85.5 because they want to avoid ties, obviously.
Right. That's right.
And we did it for all 15 teams, and we picked over or under for all 15. And then within that, 1 or 2 teams per division that we felt strongly about, we said these were ones we would actually kind of bet on.
Should we start with the AL Central or should we end with the AL Central?
Well, let's run through the other two real quick because I don't think we need to spend that much time on the East and the West.
Okay.
So
I'm going to start with the West.
Okay.
West was, at the bottom of it was Oakland, 59.5, and we both spent minutes bewailing the fact that the number was so low.
It was 59.5. You rarely see, for instance, the second lowest over-under in the American League was 69.5.
That's right.
So they were 10 games worse in terms of over-under. And you might say, well, teams lose 100-plus games all the time. Yes, but this is attempting to give you like a 50th percentile outcome.
Yeah.
The goal of Vegas...
They could have lost 101 games and still beat that.
Right,
over.
exactly. The goal of an over-under from like a casino standpoint or a gambling site standpoint is not to predict. It's to they would love to get 50% of the bets on one side and 50% on the other. That's always the goal of an over-under or a point spread or whatever, because if you can do that, the bets all cancel themselves out, so you're not losing any money, and then you just get 10% of the losses.
That's right.
So if you can get precisely 50% of all bets on each side, you will make 5% of all bets if you're the house.
That's right.
And so that's what they're trying to do. And so you regress it towards the mean, basically. And so even though everybody and their mother could have looked at the Oakland A's roster and said, this is a garbage team.
We knew that it was going to be the worst team in the division, and we were
59.5.
59.5 is hard to get.
So did we both take the over?
We both took the over.
And we were dead wrong.
We both took the over, and we both bet on. We should mention, we not only picked the over-under on all these, we also picked 2 teams in each division to bet on.
I like when you go, we should mention that. I did mention.
Oh, did you? Okay, I missed that.
And it was clear immediately that we would be wrong because they started the season like 4-40 or something like that, and they actually got a little better to the point that they were like better than the Royals.
But they still ended up with 50 wins, 9.5 below it.
Yeah, I mean they were just
unbelievable.
Now I didn't know that their ballpark situation would get as bad as it did, and that the moving to Vegas would get as bad, and that just the vibes around this team were horrible, and that probably played a part in it too. But we were wrong about that. The second worst team in terms of projection was the Angels,
and we were right about
at
that
81.5.
Yep.
I have essentially defaulted to picking the under on the Angels every year, regardless of what it is. And they started okay.
Yes.
And then guys started getting hurt, and they did some crazy stuff at the trade deadline. And they won 73.
Yes.
So 81.5.
They were short of it 8.5.
Did we both take the under on
We
the
both took the under, and I bet on it. So I got that one right.
So we were right about that. Then the Rangers were the middle team in the AL West. 82.5 was their over-under, and they won 90.
Yeah. Now, this was coming off of a season in which I think they had won 68 games.
They were terrible.
But their Pythagorean, which is the projected based on run differential, was closer to like 77 or something like that.
The past several off seasons, they've made some big-ticket moves.
Right.
DeGrom, although he got hurt. John Gray. They had signed Simeon and Seager the year before.
So Vegas picked a number 14.5 games better than they finished the next year, and I think that's why you might have chosen the under.
I took the under.
You took
the over.
I took the over.
And here's all you need to know. They're still playing.
Yes.
So the under lost.
Well, that was also one of those that we knew pretty much immediately because they were way out ahead of the AL West, and then they ended up coming back to the pack and actually not winning the AL West, losing it on the last day, but they still got crushed the 82.5.
That was a very clear loss.
7.5 over.
So then the number 2 team in the division in terms of over-under was the Mariners at 87.5.
Right.
And I took the over, I know.
Yep.
You took what?
I also took the over.
And we won that by 0.5.
We won that on the last day.
They beat the Rangers.
Yeah, which cost the Rangers the AL West.
Yes.
Because the Rangers were all hungover from celebrating the night before,
There's some disagreement about that in the people who reported that.
Yeah, okay.
The Rangers GM was very mad at the people who talked about
whatever.
that. But yes. Yeah, so that's it's amazing when that happens.
Yeah,
I mean that's effectively a tie, but that's why they have half.
We actually talked about the Friday just before the end of the season, suggesting, hey, we're going to talk a little bit about the games that were going on and how things could end up for the Twins because we were all watching to see who the Twins would end up facing
in the AL West.
But we also said, I could just cover the over unders for the last 3, and we're like, we probably know they're probably going to be there probably aren't any that are close. And it turns out there were 2 that were decided on the last day.
So that one, I'm brilliant because I picked 88 and it was 87.5. So I'm a genius. The first place team was the team that actually ended up winning, although not without a fight.
Yes.
The Astros, their over-under was 96.5, which was the highest in the American League.
And we bemoaned that left and right.
And that's extremely high. The same way that Oakland, that 59.5 is extremely low.
Right.
I mean, 90 or 92 is a really high over-under because, again, they're trying to regress it. And yet, at 96.5, I thought, they'll win 100 games. So I picked the over.
And you bet on it.
Yes, I was very wrong. They only won 90.
Yeah, I also picked the over.
Yes.
I didn't bet on it. But, yeah, so what I would say about that, we ended up going, I went 3-2. You went 2-3. I went 1-1 on my bets. You went 0-2.
Yeah.
And I would say, where we messed up was on the high and the low end.
Right.
Right. If we would have understood, both times we were like, these numbers are just so out of whack.
Yeah.
But one of them we said, we don't care. It's out of whack, but we're still going to pick the over. And the other one we're like, we're so out of whack down the low, we're not going to take the under.
I agree. I would also argue, because I hate to admit that I was wrong, that I was right about the Houston Astros. They're really good.
They're
still
good.
playing.
They were
I think
very good.
probably at this point they might be favored to win the World Series.
I would suggest we were right in general about that whole division. I think we nailed what the order was going to be, with the exception of Texas being a little bit better than Seattle.
Yeah. Okay, but now we'll move on to the East, which I have a feeling I did very poorly here. But the bottom team in the East was actually the Orioles coming into the season at 76.5. They had lost 100-plus games pretty much every year. Last year they were sort of competitive.
They were pretty good. Last year I think they were close to a 500 team.
Well, yeah, but they traded guys away at the deadline, and 76.5. Now that's the toughest division year in and year out, and so the numbers there are going to be sort of depressed a little bit or suppressed a little bit.
Yeah. We talked a lot about that in the podcast.
Now the Orioles 76.5. I do remember thinking, well, that's an easy over. I didn't expect them to win 101 games and get the number 1 seed in the American League, but I certainly thought they'd have a winning record. They had a ton of young talent coming up.
What threw us about that one is that's just such a high. And I think at least what threw me in that, that's just such a high total for the worst team in the division.
Yeah, although I didn't think they'd be the worst team.
Yeah, you thought it was going to be Boston, right? And you were right. And
yet I still got it wrong on Boston because, as we'll note here, so the Orioles were 76.5. They beat it by 25 games, 24 and a half games. Yeah.
Right.
Did we both take the over on Orioles?
No, I took the under and I bet on it.
John.
I took the under and I bet on it.
Hold on. Let me savor this moment where you're stupid and I'm smart because it's going to go the opposite way here in a second. The Red Sox were the second lowest over-under, 77.5. I was convinced they were going to be bad this year, like legitimately bad. So I took the under, and here's much like the Mariners, they won 78. So I was wrong by a half game.
Yeah, and you bet on it.
Yeah. Now, I would again argue I was right. The Red Sox stunk. They were clearly the worst team in this division.
Yep.
But this is why gambling is difficult, kids. So 77.5, they won 78. They hit the over. I picked the under. Whatever.
I also picked the under, but I didn't bet on it.
This would be one of those.
Yeah, so I'm 0 for 2 so far in the AL East.
I'd leave the state rather than pay a bookie for that loss. I'd be like, no, I refuse. That's why people break my legs in McDonald's parking lots and stuff. Middle team in the East in terms of preseason were the Tampa Bay Rays at 88.5. Now, here's why I'm stupid. Much like I said, I bet against the Angels every year for like a decade. I pick the under no matter what it is. I, for a decade, took the opposite approach with the Rays, which is no matter what the line was set.
And I think the second year in a row that you made this mistake.
This is why I'm stupid.
Yeah.
For 8 years, 7 years in a row, Joe Madden, Kevin Cash, Friedman was the GM. He leaves, whatever. Because every year everyone goes, well, how can the Rays compete? They have no payroll. They just lost 3 of their best guys. Right. We don't know anybody on the roster. And my thing was, just bet on the Rays every time. They always beat it. And they do every year. Yep. Except last year I was like, no, I'm going to bet against the Rays. And then I did that again this year. 88.5. Which
by the end of April, it was apparent we were
wrong. They started like 30-2 or something like that. And I was like, no, they did fade midseason. But they ended up with 99 wins.
Yes.
So they beat it by 11.
That's right.
So I was very wrong about the under there.
Yes.
Did you take the under?
I took the over and I bet on it.
Yeah, see, this is where I don't like this is headed. Because it's about to get even worse. So the Blue Jays were second highest in the division at 92.5. And
we both loved the Blue Jays.
I did think the Blue Jays were going to be very good.
We both thought they were going to be. I think we both thought they were going to be the best team in that division.
Yes, I did. Well, no, I didn't. I thought this doesn't make me look any better, but I thought the Yankees would be the best team in the But the Blue Jays were good. I mean, they won 89 games.
Yes. Unfortunately, they were supposed to win 92.5. Right.
And so I took the over, and I was wrong. You took the over, and you were wrong.
And you bet on it.
And then the Yankees were at 94.5. This is the one I really regret. Because I think, in general, I've often picked the Yankees to beat their over-under, and I think in general that's been right. Even though there is some inflation there because there are more people interested in betting optimistically about the Yankees just because there's more Yankees fans than anybody. It's the same thing as the Cowboys and the Lakers.
We generally talk in every episode about Yankees number is probably a little inflated.
A little bit, yeah.
Right.
94.5 was second in the American League behind only the Astros. But much like I did with the Astros, I didn't let that change my overall opinion that the Yankees were just very good. Right. I thought, Rodon and some of the other pitching moves they made would really benefit them. Instead, their rotation just kind of fell apart. Severino was terrible. Rodon was useless. Yeah. They only won 82 games. It was the worst Yankees season in, 30 years or something like that. 94.5, I picked the over and was dead wrong. That's probably the one I was most wrong about, I would say. Just like, I don't mean numbers-wise. I just mean philosophically.
Yes,
I was completely wrong about the New York Yankees on every front this season, which I'm happy to be wrong. Yeah. When I'm optimistic about the Yankees and they're terrible,
when I come to the Yankees, I know that I dislike that team so much that I almost always want to choose the under. Too. So this time I kind of went, I'll just stay with the over, so I don't jinx it.
Okay, so I went.
So I picked the over.
1-4 in the East. Yeah. You went what?
I went also 1-4 in the East.
So we're stupid.
But I went 1-1 on my bets, and you went 0-2.
Yeah, this is not. I don't like this.
It's not going well for you.
Let's move to the Central, which is really all that matters. Let's be honest. Yeah, let's go with that. This is, money is won or lost in the American League Central. People have always said that. Yeah, right. Jimmy the Greek used to say that. I know.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll start at the bottom. It was a tie at the bottom,
right?
Which these were tied for the second worst over/under totals, other than the A's, 69.5, right, which is not that low. It's that's reasonable, I would say. Were the Royals and the Tigers. I thought both would be really bad. I definitely thought the Royals would be the worst team in the division, but I also thought the Tigers just didn't have any pitching.
Right.
So I took the under on both. The Royals won 56 games. They were every bit as bad. I would almost argue they were a worse team, like big picture, than Oakland.
Yeah.
now that's silly, obviously. They won 6 more games. But Oakland started so terribly that Oakland semi-recovered, whereas the Royals got worse and worse as the year went on.
Right.
So that was an easy under. Did you also take the under on the Royals?
I took the under on both of them.
Okay, so we were 1-1 on those. The Tigers ended up finishing in second place.
Yeah, but I bet on the Kansas City under. So
okay. The Tigers won 78 games. Yeah. They were ahead of Cleveland at the end of the season.
They beat the projection by 8.5.
Yes.
Yeah.
They got some good performances. Guys like Torkelson were pretty good. Riley Green was good before he got hurt.
You think that's the second best team in the AL Central right now? I mean, I know they were this year.
This season,
yeah, going into next year.
I still would assume Cleveland
would
be,
too.
But who knows?
I would too.
The middle, so we went 1-1 on those. The middle team actually tied with the White Sox, but actually, save the Twins to the end. But
okay.
The White Sox 83.5. For me, easy under. I'm sure if you go back and listen, like I thought the White Sox. We kind of saw it coming. I didn't think they lost 100 games.
Right.
I didn't think they were going to completely fall apart.
Right.
But I looked at it and it was like this core that was supposed to be so good never really reached any heights.
Right.
And now they're kind of crumbling and starting to get old.
But part of it was because they'd been hurt so much. And we were kind of like, well, maybe they can stay healthy this year, etc. Yeah, this is one of the ones where we disagreed on, and you got this one right.
Yeah.
I picked the over and you picked the under.
And they were 22 games worse than the over-under.
Yeah, and neither of us bet on it because I don't think I at least knew I didn't have any idea on that team. To me, it was a coin flip.
Atop the division in terms of over-under.
They were the biggest underperforming team in the American League relative to their over-under.
Is that true?
22.5
That's
down.
True.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. They're the biggest losers. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Yeah. Guardians had the highest over-under in the division at 86.5, although, let's note, that was only the 6th highest over-under in the American League out of 15 teams, which nobody expected the AL Central to be good at all. Nobody thought it would be the worst division of all time. But I picked the over.
Yes, and you bet on it.
Did you also pick the over?
Yes, I also picked the over.
So
I feel a little. I think what I had on my sheet was 88 wins.
Okay.
And so I was like, I guess I got to take the over.
Yeah, I kind of thought that the Guardians would win roughly 90 games, which has sort of been their MO. I didn't think they'd be considerably worse this year than they were last year. I kind of thought the Twins had the potential to win 90 games, but would probably win 85 to 88 games. Right, yeah. And so that's sort of how I viewed the division. I thought the White Sox would be 500-ish, and I thought the Royals and Tigers would be terrible. That's sort of how it played out. The White Sox were much worse. I think Cleveland, for much of the season, people kept assuming, we talked a lot about this, that they were going to start performing like a 90-win team, and it just never happened. And then once they kind of September rolled around and they were 3% to win the division, the bottom just kind of fell out. Like Francona, they knew was retiring. They had a bunch of injuries. It kind of reminded me in some ways of the Twins last season, which is once it started to slip away, they had no ability to keep a grip on things. And it just completely slipped away to the point that, like we just said, they didn't even finish second. They finished behind the Detroit Tigers in the worst division of all time, which is not great. So I was very wrong about that.
I think my philosophy, we started with the AL Central last time, and I started with a philosophy there that was, listen, I know there's 3 good teams in this division and 2 bad teams in this division. I'm just going to choose the over on the 3 good teams. I'm going to choose the under on the 2 bad teams. I ended up doing that through all 3 of the divisions, basically. I said, here are the 3 teams I think are going to really compete. Here's the 2 I don't think are going to compete. And I think that's what I did in all 3, and
didn't work great.
It didn't work out particularly well.
So, last but not least, the Minnesota Twins, who had an over-under of 83.5. We both took the over.
Yep. And we both bet on it because we always have. We choose that as the one we have to bet on.
Feel strongly about the Twins one way or the other. And, you might think, well, don't these guys bet the over on the Twins every year? Certainly not.
No, we do not.
We
also picked at the end of the episode the total number of wins we thought they would have.
Oh, I don't remember that. Do you have that written down?
I do have
that.
Okay. Yep.
So, obviously, we don't need to rehash the Twins season. You guys watched it and listened and all that. But it did play out. I guess I'll hear what my actual pick was. I have no memory. I mean, in my mind...
We just always throw that in at the end of it.
It's good.
Yeah,
it's good.
Yeah.
In my mind, 6 months later, in my feeble brain, I thought 85 to 88 wins for this team. And my question wasn't so much, would they win more than that and take the division? It was, would Cleveland kind of only win that many and it would be a race?
Right. That's right.
That is sort of what happened. Cleveland was much worse. To me, 83.5 was a relatively easy overpick for the Twins. Again, not because I thought they were great, but until they completely collapsed under the weight of never-ending injuries last September, they were playing at roughly an 85-win pace or an 83.5-win pace at least.
We made this point when we were talking about the number of 83.5. We were kind of like, they were like an 85, 86-win team, and then they were a replacement level team for the last month, and therefore they ended up at 83.
You can't just discount their worst moment of the season, obviously, but there were extenuating circumstances there injury-wise.
Moment/month.
Right, yes. And so, I felt like the worst case for them was like 500-ish.
Right.
And given the weakness of the overall division, some of the moves they made, some of the young guys they had coming, we didn't expect this much impact from rookies. But that I thought 83.5 was pretty safe. I thought I did pick them second in the division.
Yes.
So it's not like I was that high on the Twins. But I just thought Cleveland would be better than they were. So we both picked the over on them.
Yes.
We were both right on that. Which means I went 3-2 in the Central.
Yes.
Which is why I'm choosing.
And 1-1 on the bets.
Yeah, but I'm 3-2 in the Central. None of the other divisions matter that much. We're a Central-focused podcast. I don't need East Coast bias, West Coast bias.
Yeah,
There's a lot of media trying to change my opinion of these teams. The Central is where
East Coast elites, those West Coast libertarians.
Yeah, I don't need any of that.
People,
I focus on the farmland, the salt of the earth, Americans.
You. Yeah,
that is me.
You are close to the land for sure.
One of the two of us hangs out on a farm multiple times a year.
It's true,
and it ain't you.
It's true.
Yeah,
you and your DoorDash.
Yeah, they don't have DoorDash out there. It's really tricky. I just have to meet someone.
When I went out with Becky after one of those games, we were talking about how amusing it would be to see you take over the farm for any period of time, because you're just like, I would like to be left alone.
Yes,
and so that would be the.
I like the wilderness aspect of it.
Yeah, it was just like, but how are you going to eat?
Yeah, it's a little tricky.
You're going to have to actually start cooking food.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. Well, since she's roasting me, she ain't gonna cook, so we're in trouble there.
Well, that was her point, though. I was like, neither of us are gonna cook. Right.
Well, remember we went on a related note. We interviewed Glenn Perkins.
A lot of HelloFresh is the answer.
Yeah, right. Glenn Perkins has since sold his compound, but we went out there. It was like an hour away. I forget where it was, but it was very far away.
Lakeville.
And I remember, but it was like deep.
Yeah, it was deep Lakeville.
I remember we drove out there like in January, and we were like, "Oh, we're gonna die again."
Near Elko, yeah.
So we get out there and we interview him, and he had a great place. They've sold it since then, but he had built himself like a barn, like a man cave, but in a barn and all that. We had a great time with him. Had some bourbon, had some beer. He had like basically a brewery,
a little mini brewery.
It was amazing.
It was great.
And then I said to him, what's the Chinese food and pizza delivery situation around here? And he was like, oh, non-existent. Like there's nothing. And I'm like, man, I could not live out here. And first he laughed and he was like, oh, it is kind of a pain in the ass. Because they got like little kids. So it's like, we want to get them pizza one night. It's like, nope, you can't do that.
A lot of Haggies.
Yeah.
A lot of 7th Avenue.
That's right. You need a big freezer. Okay. So in general,
overall,
I think I went 6-9.
Correct.
Which is not nice. 6-9.
Nope.
And here's the funny part: the ones that we felt the strongest about, which theoretically you would like to think that.
That's all I really care about is the betting ones. The other ones I don't really care about because a lot of those we're just saying, it's a coin flip. We don't know.
This is why
these are the ones I really feel.
It's like
good
I only
about.
care about the Central. It's a good angle to take to make yourself feel better. You would theoretically think, well, okay, I went 6-9. What is that? 40% win rate or whatever. But the ones I felt strongly about, I should at least be 50-50. Nope. I went 1-5 on the ones I feel strongest about.
I also went 6-9 overall.
Yeah.
I went 4-2 on the ones
much
I cared
better.
about.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Boy, that's interesting.
A lot
means nothing, but it's interesting to me. So yeah, that's the second year in a row now we've done pretty poorly on these.
Yeah, I think we went 6-9 last year, 7-8.
So I would suggest we'll keep going, but I've already lost my house and my car now those last 2 years, so I don't really have any collateral that I can put up on.
I did pretty well, so I'm actually up a little bit.
Can I borrow $1 million?
There you go.
I really want to put over/under on whatever.
Your season total for the Twins. Do you have any idea what the guess was?
Place to end on. Yes. So, like I said, in my feeble mind, I think I probably picked like 86 or 87 wins.
You did. You picked 86.
Okay. And they won 87.
Uh-huh.
That's pretty good. What did you pick?
87.
Oh, wow. You know what they call it? Dead nuts on. That's what they call that. Look at you. Look how, if you could see how happy he looks.
Last year was one of the few years where when we say the number, like what we think the number is going to be, usually you go first, and then I always try to pick something different, so we just have a little bit of a difference.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened to you this year is I went first this year.
Price is right at me.
I said 87, and you said you were thinking to yourself, well, I can't pick 87. I've either got to go higher or lower, and you went with the lower.
Okay.
So yeah, you didn't really. I don't think you really had a chance to choose 87. Is what I'm saying. You got as close as you could because you didn't want to pick the same thing as me. Yeah.
And we're a Twins podcast.
Well, the problem with you
we
picking
nailed
exactly
the Twins season. We got it 100% correct. John got it literally 100% correct. I was off by one win. That's pretty good. Let's focus on that and not the fact that we lost billions of dollars to all casinos, going 6-9 on these other divisions.
We're going to need to work on that for this upcoming year. No question about it.
Well,
because here's the thing. Last year when we did it, last March when we recorded this, right? We started
2 Marches ago, you mean?
No, I'm saying
this last
March when we looked and we said, we did really poorly last year.
Yeah.
But we wrote that off to, there was a lockout.
It was a weird season.
We didn't really have time to analyze it. All these things were coming in late.
What do we write it off?
We didn't have any good reason.
Yeah, I don't know. Drugs and alcohol.
Maybe
being old.
Yeah.
Being stupid, but I mean that hasn't stopped us before.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know.
None of those things. I guess some of those things have probably gotten a little worse. Older has gotten worse.
Oh yeah. The drugs and alcohol are better than ever. Here's
what I came up with. I don't like my 3-2 strategy next year. I'm not going to do the 3-2 strategy.
Well, all strategy should be out the window now after back-to-back poor seasons. I just long for the days where I thought I was a genius for going 13-2 or whatever.
The strategy I kind of looked at this year, and after looking at it, I said so many of them were off by so much.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing is last year when we were doing this in March when we were doing this, we kept saying, we think we got a pretty good idea of the team. The problem is that the over-under is so good.
Right.
It was just being set it was for a really good team, it was being set very high. For a very bad team, and then a lot of them was like
there weren't that many easy ones.
That's what we thought when we saw those.
Yeah.
Turns out there were a crap load of easy ones.
Oh,
there were 2 that missed by half a game. There were 2 that missed by 3.5 games. All the rest were like 7 games or 7 to 25 games off.
But here's how I'm going to go to sleep tonight thinking about. We're a Twins show. We've been doing this show about the Twins for, 11 years? Something like that?
Yeah.
Would you rather we have a really good record picking over-unders for the whole American League. We're betting every year we go 10-5,
but we're
constantly wrong about the Twins.
Yeah, right.
Or would you rather we are terrible
I guess.
and we nail the Twins?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, that's good.
That is
fair.
A very convenient question to pose.
Yeah, that's right.
Given the circumstances of this season, but that is what I will stick with until next year when we completely get the Twins wrong and we do well in the other divisions, and I'll flip flop.
It'd be interesting to see how we justified it in 2016 when we were so far off about the Twins.
Don't try to come on now, steady on, come on.
They were a 60-win team. We both picked the over.
Listen, it is what it is. Gambling's hard. Don't gamble, kids. And if you have a problem with gambling, call 1-800. No one cares. Okay, that's it. Yeah. We will be back Monday on the Patreon side, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman, with a first-time guest that we are looking forward to chatting with. We will get him for
I
a few
just got a
months
text.
Here.
It might not be Monday. It might be Tuesday.
Okay.
We'll see.
It'll be this upcoming week. Yeah,
right.
John's got some family stuff or whatever going on.
Thank you to Hatch and to Harry's and to Stamps and to Game Time for keeping this podcast absolutely free for everybody. And when my guess is we will be giving you another podcast potentially Thursday, maybe Friday next week. We will be back with more news and notes.
So, in the meantime, patreon.com/Gleeman. Sign up. It's not going to cost you that much. We'll be doing deep dives, emergency shows, interviews. You're into the Twins. You can be into them during the off season too. It'll cost you less than during the season. So, and if you don't, we'll see you back here, same time, same place.
Gleeman